You're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia 106.5 in the 215. And you're listening to the What's Next radio show and Ray's Latino Talk podcast. This is the podcast home for the realest conversation and analysis on politics and today's hottest topics from a diverse perspective. As someone told me today, she said, I love hearing a podcast about politics that isn't a bunch of white dudes talking. Indeed, it's not. This is your host, Ray Collazo. I'm a family man and proud Philly Boricua, which we'll get into later in the show. This episode is dedicated, of course, to the victims and their families of the horrific shootings at the mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, leaving dozens no longer with us and many others injured. Tayazina to our Muslim familia. Thank you so much for joining us. Later in the show, we will discuss an important new initiative to grow Philadelphia's neighborhoods, our weekly Stack in 20 segment, which is clearly my favorite, on the presidential race. And, we'll probably hear a poem from a great Puerto Rican woman poet later in the show. But first, we want to introduce our very special guest. It took 303 episodes, people. We are making it happen here. Historical. By day, Yvette Nunez is the Vice President of Civic Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. But beyond her career title, Nunez is indeed a fierce advocate who elevates her voices every day through activism, the arts, her faith, and motherhood. Yvette Nunez, welcome finally to Ray's Talk Show.
Thank you for having me.
This is really exciting. Besides Yvette's first appearance on the show, which, again, it was easier for me to get Residente from Calle 13 on the show. Ray Suarez has been on the show twice.
I think I was invited to be on the show before the show existed.
Major League Hall of Famer Ivan Rodriguez has been on the show.
Oh, my goodness.
And Yvette, we finally were able to corral Yvette, Planetary, watching on Facebook Live, Madeline Villanueva. For those listening either as a radio show and podcast, we're also Facebook Living. So if I shout out random Latino names or random homeboys and homegirls, understand what we're doing here. Yvette, thank you so much, all jokes aside, for being on the show. We're so excited to hear your perspective on how to grow Philadelphia's neighborhoods in a moment. But, I really, since it's your first appearance, all jokes aside, I really wanted to start this by introducing your perspective to our Race Talk Show family and our WPPM family. So let's start at the beginning, Yvette. Where did this journey begin for you?
So I think my journey in community service and Latino community service and activism began in the projects of Newark, New Jersey.
Brick City.
I grew up in the housing project, 7th Avenue, Newark. My story's out there more so I'm more comfortable discussing it. But, deep poverty, no food in the fridge, no sheets on the bed. My mom was an alcoholic and died when I was 10 of alcoholism. My father was a drug dealer in those buildings. He, our family, I have 5 older brothers. Our family was very well known on those streets. My brothers were all over 6 feet tall, and my father, kind of ran those buildings, and he died when I was 11. He died of AIDS. And so growing up in high school and college, that story I didn't share with too many people, not because I was ashamed of the story, but because I didn't want to come across people that would then judge my family. I was very protective of that story and of my family. And then as an adult, and certainly by now as a mother, I think it's really important that we share our stories and that we bring that perspective into the work that we do, because it dawned on me, especially I dedicated my life to working in the nonprofit sector and working in the Latino community, whether professionally or as a volunteer, because I felt like I understood where a lot of those folks coming in for services were coming from. And I could imagine what their homes were looking like and the kinds of issues that they were dealing with in a way that other executives at the tables I was sitting at probably hadn't seen firsthand. And so I think it's important, and I'm sharing my story more and more because I want people who are not experiencing or have not experienced that kind of childhood or grow up in those kinds of neighborhoods to realize that there are a lot of assets in those neighborhoods. There's a lot of poverty, but I'm not unique. There are a lot of Yvettes coming out of those neighborhoods, and I want them to be able to connect me to the reality of those neighborhoods so that they don't see poor people, poor Puerto Ricans as other. They see them as people who have possibility and can bring something to the table.
Well, you way to kick this off, Yvette, and I appreciate you sharing your story. And there's so much that comes to my mind when you begin sharing thinking about this college scandal that's been percolating and kind of how it's brought up this conversation around how as we were blessed enough and privileged enough to be able to go to, acquire higher education, is that while we're trying to strive and sort of achieve the American dream and do it the way you're supposed to do it, right? In the case of you, the ultimate pull yourself up from your bootstrap story is that we're made to be questioned about our credentials, made to feel questioned about. So just a thought about kind of how were you able to, and you sort of alluded to this, you were able to turn around what some would think is a sad story or a tragic story, but really use it as an asset as you move through your career.
Absolutely. So I wasn't just the first person in my family to go to college. I was the first person to graduate from high school. And so taking that, all by myself with no one paying anybody to get me into any school. And I have two older kids who are going through or have gone through the college application process. I did that all by myself. I showed up at Temple for orientation on the Bieber bus, by myself. No one dropped me off. And so I think that a lot of that I don't regret, and a lot of that has made me the woman and the mother that I am today. And I think that having to go through those difficult situations, whatever they are, it's not poverty for everyone, but whatever they are, if you are conscious of it and bring it and can use it as an example, either for yourself, for your family, or for the people you serve and your coworkers, use it. Because there are going to be other people, whether they've gone through the same thing or not, who will be inspired and, their perspective of what it means to be X, what it means to be poor, what it means to be Puerto Rican, what it means to be an orphan. Their perspective of what that means will change just by your example.
And we never know by sharing a story like that who it's going to impact and how it's going to impact them, right?
Yeah.
So I was approached by a young woman, Yanisi Velez. I was in D.C. with her, and literally, she worked for me in Orlando many years ago, and we literally found her she had just come from Puerto Rico, and she was at a community college trying to go to school to learn some English, and we just found a spark in her. Me and Roberto Cancel and some other coworkers gave her an opportunity, and we quickly moved her up the ranks, and she became an organizer for us. Long story short, she was just named the Florida State Director for the Hispanic Federation, which is a plum gig and very well deserved. And I saw her in D.C. the other day, and she was with a young woman that she's working with, and she said, Rafi, I want to introduce you to, I don't remember her name, but my new staffer, because I've committed to do for her what you did for me. And so, part of that was, not just giving her a chance, but understanding what you just said, which is there's so many times people put this filter about where we're coming from, and it's actually the opposite, is that, and thinking about you, and many people that are watching this on Facebook Live or listening know you from your time at Congreso, and we were doing something with my job at Unidos. We were with Cynthia, we were touring the Badlands, we were doing something with some folks who came from out of town, and I remember telling someone that they were sort of just floored, and the opioid crisis was bubbling up at that point, the homelessness, and they were just really sort of struck by some of the poverty and some of the things they saw, and I said, but you have to understand something. Myself, Yvette, I'm pointing at people around, some Daisy, Waleska, some of the amazing leaders, the councilwoman, Nilda, of May PM, many of the people that you see here and admire are from these same communities.
Exactly.
So these communities are birthing, thinking about my friends, the Sanchez sisters in Camden. I don't know how, their mom raised 5 daughters, all got master's degrees, PhDs on a block in Camden that some people would think the Middle East, right? So just, can you talk about that around, because I feel like that's kind of one of our challenges that, again, this college scandal's brought up, is that we have to stand up for our communities to share the other side of the story, because so much of our, and Cory Booker now is talking a lot about this in an interesting way around, just if any city, Camden, Newark, Philly, North Philly is referred to as the inner city, there's just bad stigma, and on some level, we're stigmatized. So can you talk about how you've sort of tried to flip that script in your career to share, because you're a storyteller, at your heart, to tell the real story of our neighborhoods and how we grew up?
I do it, I think, in every opportunity. Even now in my current position, I'm the first Latina at that executive table in its 200-plus year history. And so it's also the first place I've worked that was not a minority-majority organization. And so that could be intimidating going in. And certainly there were some days where I felt out of place. But I use it because the work that I do is so aligned with who I am. The reason I pursue the opportunities that I've pursued, whether it is working at a major organization like Congreso or even at the chamber, the work that I oversee is relevant to neighborhoods and community. So there are days where I bring the chamber to Taller, to 5th and Huntington, and people come up to me and say, I cannot believe you got the Chamber of Commerce here to 5th and Huntington. Same thing to Girard College. Many of our members have never been there, have never heard of it. And so I do those things intentionally because I bring who I am to the work that I do. And I'm very blessed to have been able to do that my entire career. And you referenced my faith before. And what I was thinking is, God has done me the favor of waiting for me to realize that it was him all along. Because,
Preach, girl.
For the first 20 years of my career or so, I really thought it was me. I thought it was, wow, I'm doing this despite where I come from. I'm doing this to honor everybody from 7th Avenue. And it's in the last 5 years or so, I've always, loved God, believed there was a God, but didn't really align my life with him. And over the last 5 years, he just keeps humoring me with my perception of who I am versus who he has designed me to be.
What put you at that tipping point where you I don't want to say change directions, but sort of kind of embrace your spirituality in a different way, in a more proactive way, I guess?
I think it was a series of personal and professional lessons, many mishaps, where you get to a point, especially if you've already believed in God, where you just have to surrender and say, I give up. I can't do it on my own anymore. And so it's taken me 5 years and I'm still learning so many things. Mm-hmm. But I would say that what it's given me, and I think that, my history working in community and activism has been challenged isn't the right word, but I've had to take a pause. And people who follow me on Facebook or have worked with me over the last 20 years may have noticed that, because especially when Trump took office, I had to go quiet. I was so disheartened. I was hurt. I was just in a bad place. And I took it out on Facebook, and I was like many of us did. I was posting things that were just ugly, and I was just in a really ugly place, like many of us were. And so I put myself on timeout for like 2 months. And when I came back to Facebook, I was a bit more quiet because, God is challenging me to not be so self-righteous. God calls us to be righteous, but not self-righteous. And I think that especially with politics, especially with someone like Trump in office, I can get real self-righteous real fast about what's right and what's wrong. And God loves us all, and he loves, Republicans like he loves Democrats, and he loves Trump like he loves the rest of us. And, I've had to, just be quiet as I learn.
When I went through that stage, and I never took time off on Facebook, and I got real angry, real righteous. And you remember those posts, and I still post sometimes like that. But and I remember a good friend of ours, Lena, she just had a birthday. Lena had mom from New York, just a healthcare executive in the hospital industry, administrator. She sent me a note on Facebook, real kind, and said, "Look, Ralph, we got to stay in our spiritual base. This is about helping other people. Don't make yourself so angry. You got to take care of your family." And once in a while, she'll remind me of that every 6 months when I get off the beaten path. So I want to thank Lita and my other friends for sort of trying to put that in perspective. But it is a challenge, and I actually had it in our notes, but we could talk about it now since you brought it up. But like thinking about this tragedy happened in New Zealand, like how have you found that you've able to overcome the natural reaction to respond to hate in a negative way, in a combative way, with love? Because that's really kind of what you're talking about here, which last time I checked was really what the Jesus was all about. Mm-hmm. And so it is really sort of a lesson that all faiths preach as kind of a primary tenet. But how have you, God, what happened to those people in New Zealand is so tragic. So how have you kind of been able to keep that balance? I know it's not easy.
I would just say in the quiet, not being knee-jerk about things. Prayer is central, I think, for me and my peace. And the more I pray, it's not about God changing the situation as much as it is God changing me. and God changing my perspective and my eyes and how I look at people and how I love on people. And, absolutely, you said it, Jesus is love. And what does that look like? It doesn't, and using my earlier example, Jesus is love for all populations. It means it's also, and this is a lot harder for me to swallow. And so I stay quiet because I don't, I want to learn and I want to hear what God is trying to tell me. But he's love to, and he hurts, I think, for those who exhibit so much hate in cases like New Zealand. But there, I think he also hurts for all the hate that I was exhibiting after the last election.
And we're here with Yvette Nunez, Life Force. I got to make sure Yvette's got a big title now. Always had a big title. Yvette's Vice President of Civic Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia. And we're going to get into her work in a moment. But before we go to break, Yvette, you're such a mentor and so many, particularly, you have so many friends that admire you on a personal and professional level, but particularly the Latina, your Latina girl gang out there.
Oh, I love my ladies.
That are shouting you out and really get a lot of strength from your leadership.
I get strength from them.
Oh, I know you do. And it is very reciprocal. So just a thought about, particularly in this time and the fact that you're still balancing, a lot going on with your children and they're changing, kind of transitioning in different phases of their lives, a few of them as young adults now. But just any thoughts around just words of wisdom as it relates to the Latinas out there. And everyone sees you as a superwoman, but you got a lot going on and a lot to balance. So just any thoughts on that?
You can't be all things to all people at all times. And so, to me, it's a myth that you can do all things. Thank you for referring to me as a superwoman. I don't often feel like a superwoman. Today, for example, I'm at work at 7:30 for a very high-level meeting, working all day, 5:30 parent-teacher conference, and then I'm here by 6:30 to do this. That's not what every day looks like, but at different points throughout the day, I'm wearing different identities and I'm being, something to someone, but not something for everyone. And so I think as women, as mothers, as wives, as in ministry, at work, overcoming whatever barriers are thrown at us, challenging our time and talents, I think it's important to be centered in what, and I'm not pretending that I'm doing a good job of this, but be centered in what you're trying to achieve, at least for that day, and prioritizing what's most important for you and your family in that day. And for mothers who feel guilty, I'm there very often, for the late nights and the board meetings and, running and trying to do it all in soccer practice and missing this and missing that. Your kids see what you're doing and your kids will honor it. In the past week or so, my kids have just completely shocked me with who they see me as, right? We don't, you're always mom, but if you hear your kids talking about you to other people, that's how they see you. And I'm so humbled and honored by how my children see me as a woman of faith, but also as a woman who works very hard. For example, someone at my son's school, told him, "Oh, you guys are rich because you've been to California and Disney World and all these places." And I'm laughing at that. And, Cruz told them, "No, it's just that my mom works really hard and she believes in Jesus and she's patient." So just in that one sentence, my son sees me work, right? He sees how hard I work, but he also sees that I have faith. And he sees that I'm patient, or he understands that you have to be patient in order to achieve the things that you want. So your kids, and I've never told him that. I've never said, "Cruz, I believe in Jesus, I work hard, and I'm patient. That's why we have the things that we have." He came up with that all on his own. And so to the moms who are feeling guilty for trying to do and be all things, at the end of the day, your kids love you and they see who you are at your heart, and they will continue to honor you.
When I announced that Yvette Nunez was going to be on Ray's talk show, our dear compadre, Cesar Santiago, said people got to bring out their notebooks.
Where's Cesar? He's in Florida now?
Yeah, que la buena vida. He lives in Miami, and he's probably smoking a Cuban cigar,
I know,
watching this on the veranda somewhere with some waves splashing. But he said people got to bring out their notebooks and start writing down because Yvette's going to drop some jewels, and she is not disappointed. When we come back, Yvette, we're going to get focus on some of the work you're doing in Philadelphia around the Neighborhood Growth Project. And we're going to bring Yvette right back after this break on Ray's Talk Show. You're listening to What's Next radio show on WPPM LP Philadelphia, 106.5 FM in the 215. And, of course, for our podcast listeners, we never stop. Ray's Latino Talk podcast. This event is episode 303. We're going to play. Y'all need to play that number tomorrow because I know y'all play the number still. Listen to 106.5 FM in Philly, phillycam.org/listen. Of course, you can listen in your car in the Philly area or the TuneIn app. And you can download the Ray's Latino Talk podcast anywhere. I mean, anywhere. iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. The list goes on and on. Thank you so much for joining us. A lot of support the great programming here at WPPM LP and support the movement. I know y'all got a lot of love for the show, but I can use a favor. Subscribe to the show. Leave a little comment. That helps raise us up the rankings because the only thing, we just need a little more exposure for the show. We got a lot of everyone who checks out the show is very impressed by, I'm okay. But it's these amazing A-list people, particularly these Latina powerhouses like Yvette that I bring onto the show. And, of course, check us out on social media at Ray's Podcast. On Twitter, IG, Ray's Latino Talk. You can always email us, too, at podcastrays@gmail.com. Yvette, shout out your social media where you wanted people to follow you up on this conversation.
You can follow me on Twitter at Yvette A. Nunez, without the Enye, of course. And then you can friend me on Facebook because Ralph tagged me, but it's going to stress me out because I don't accept strangers.
No, that's fine. I didn't mention. Sounds good. We're talking today. Want to shout out so I'd like to highlight Yvette like a new listener of the week. She's actually a colleague of mine, Alicia Lewis from Sacramento, California.
Hey, Alicia.
She gave us a big shout out today. She said, man, I love the conversation. She enjoyed our conversation on gaslighting last week with Dionelis Reyes,
nice.
An up-and-coming entrepreneur and speaker on her experiences. And she I think after this conversation, she's going to be known as the Yvette of the West Coast.
Oh.
Because you two have a very similar zeitgeist. So I definitely want to connect you two women. And again, we're talking today with our special guest, Yvette Nunez. Besides being very much sort of the den mother of the Latino community in Philly and the area, Yvette is the Vice President of Civic Affairs at the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia. Yvette, the Chamber's kicking off a very interesting new initiative. Can you share with us the purpose of the Philadelphia Neighborhood Growth Project?
Happily. So first, I'm going to step back to talk a little bit about the work I oversee at the Chamber, overseeing local government advocacy and its Roadmap for Growth Action Team. I'm very proud of the work we've been able to do in the 2 years I've been overseeing Roadmap in bringing the Chamber into Philadelphia neighborhoods throughout the city for conversations with business, government, nonprofit, and civic sector about the issues that we're all trying to grapple with, whether it's neighborhood economic development, vulnerable populations like the homeless and panhandling population. In February, we had a conversation about the opioid epidemic, education, advocacy. We're all trying to work on these issues from our various perspectives to make Philadelphia better. And so over the last 2 years, we've been doing that and going into neighborhoods for entrepreneurship, road shows for small businesses and those who want to start small businesses in their neighborhoods. And so along that vein, this year being a local election year, we wanted to make sure that this idea of growth for Philadelphia was a priority and something that we were all talking about as we head into the polls in May. And so we've conducted focus groups and are conducting surveys across the city with residents to understand what their priorities are for Philadelphia, what they want to see in their neighborhoods and in their city, and then launched this campaign last week, PHL Neighborhood Growth Project. You can follow it at phillyneighborhoodgrowthproject.com. And sign up there for more information. And so we did it really so that over the next 9 weeks before the election, we are talking about growth and what that means. So from our perspective, growth means more jobs, right? Jobs being priority number one for reducing the city's significant poverty rate. And what those jobs look like. Jobs at all levels, accessible to those who are graduating with a high school diploma, those who have college degrees, those who don't have a high school diploma, and how we as a system, as a city, as government, as education, as business, can come together to make sure that we are all pushing in the same direction for better training programs, for entrepreneurship, because it's not just about VOTEC or college degree. There's also the option to, start your own business, especially to get to wealth creation, if that's something that you want to pursue for you and your family's betterment. And so this idea about whether or not Philadelphia is growing is a conversation that we've been having for the last 6 to 12 months. And it really depends on who you ask. If you ask some people if Philly's growing, they're going to say, oh, yeah, by leaps and bounds. Look at all the cranes. I'm always getting detoured when I'm driving around. Or people will cite population, right? We were able, thanks to the growth of the Latino community in the 2000 census, we were able to reverse the city's 60-year population decline.
That's right.
So if you look at those measures, Philadelphia is growing, but Philadelphia is really only growing in comparison to Philadelphia, not in comparison to the other 9 peer cities, and not in relation to wealth measures like median household income, which is dropping.
And in particular in the Latino community, we're still probably like 45% under the poverty level.
And deep poverty is rising in Philadelphia, and poverty is remaining stagnant. So we don't look at that as growth, right? We think that we need to do better. All of us need to do better to bring in more jobs into the city and bring more jobs into neighborhoods as well.
And so from this project and kind of your previous work with the chamber and even before that, what kind of feedback have you gotten from some of those more impoverished neighborhoods, and in particular, I'm thinking about the Latino areas, that they see as either potential solutions or needs?
Well, first, everything's hyper-local, right? People are looking at their block and their neighborhood when they're looking at whether or not things are good or whether or not things are bad.
Yeah.
And so when they're looking at it, some of the priorities that I thought was interesting, people are very concerned about cleanliness in Philadelphia.
Totally.
People are very concerned about snow removal in Philadelphia, because when you walk out of your house before you get to work, before you get to school, that's what you're dealing with.
I tell you if you have a pothole in the hood, like after a week, Maria, councilwoman gets tagged, every elected official gets tagged, because you're right. It's that real neighborhood daily quality of life issues, but rightfully so.
Yeah, and then even with jobs, some of the folks that we talked to, one woman talked about how the only job she ever gets called for outside of the city, Horsham, King of Prussia, Delaware, and people do want to work closer to home. They don't want to do the 2-3 hour commute, changing buses, getting on the train, etc. They do it because they have to, and they do it because that's where the jobs are. So how can we come together as an entire community, including the business sector, nonprofits, education, civic associations, to talk about better strategies, to encourage more businesses, small businesses, to come into neighborhoods? And some of that involves access to capital. It involves, can we create a fund to be able to spur that kind of growth at the neighborhood level in partnership with City Council, in partnership with the mayor? And so that's what we're looking at. This is very much a long-term strategy. We don't pretend we have all the answers. We're definitely being collaborative in who we're partnering with, hearing from voters directly what their priorities are, and then, following suit. And then putting, as many minds together as we can to be able to affect policy in a way that it'll yield growth and impact at the neighborhood level.
And you talked about this earlier, like people going into the neighborhoods and not knowing the interesting things that are taking place in a neighborhood, right? So it's like we have business corridors that are mainly either Latino or largely immigrant run, regardless of where they're from. And
immigrants are 30% more likely to start a business than native-born population.
That's right. And so I'm curious, and I know we have our local Hispanic chamber is affiliated with you all as well, so I know you work closely with them. So I'm curious, like, what do you hear from the bodegueros, the young boy, the women with the beauty salons on the corner, people that have local businesses, want to grow them, take it to the next level? What are you hearing is something that would help them to sort of grow their business footprint?
I think part of two very important things that have come up is we have these conversations at the neighborhood level. One is access to capital to either grow your business, put better systems in place, right? Accounting systems and all of that. The second thing is succession planning. We have a lot of older business owners in our commercial corridors, who raised their kids. Their kids went off to college, because their parents were able to do that with their business. But the kids went away and they're not coming back to take over the family business. And so with succession planning, we can prevent those stores, storefronts, dry cleaners, etc., from then becoming abandoned and adding to blight in neighborhoods. So succession planning was definitely something that was identified as a need for small businesses in our commercial corridors and neighborhoods. And then training for how to scale your business. And then the city has many, many amazing resources available to those looking to start their own business. But really, if you've never been downtown, you don't know where to start, right? And if you're not online in the same way that some of us are, you don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. And so people, some people in neighborhoods need that kind of, direct service to be able to access all of the resources that do exist. And then how do we grow so that we have more for everybody? All
right, you're listening to Yvette Nunez from the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia. I know the acronym got flipped recently, and she's talking about the Philadelphia Neighborhood Growth Project, a really exciting project to really not only understand the needs of the community from your own perspective, your own block's perspective, your own neighborhood perspective, but also to raise our voice during this upcoming primary election, which essentially in many ways will act like the major election in Philadelphia. For those in the community, Yvette, that want to get more involved in this project, that want to learn more about how they can raise their voice in this conversation about how to grow these neighborhoods as a small business owner, as a working person that just wants to beautify their community, how can they get involved in the Philadelphia Neighborhood Growth Project?
So you can go online to the website, phillyneighborhoodgrowthproject.com, and sign up to receive emails. You can find us on Facebook, PHL Neighborhood Growth Project, and you can find us on Twitter at PhillyNGP.
Okay, and we definitely want to support and continue the conversation on the Growth Project. Much respect to our small business owners, especially in Philadelphia, our bodegueros, our people who are working right now, hustling, doing Uber Eats, working that second, that third job. We really appreciate our folks. Working in our community is not the issue. The issue is making sure people have access to the capital and the resources they need to grow their businesses and grow their dreams. When we come back, Yvette's going to turn the tables on me as we stack some 20s.
You are listening to WPPM LP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, and you are listening to the What's Next radio show and Ray's Latino Talk podcast. Back to our host, Ray Collazo, who is stacking bills for Love Shouldn't Hurt.
Thanks, Yvette. Yvette Nunez, who's now in the second half of the show, is going to act as my co-host as well. Really appreciate you being on the show, Yvette. And again, episode 303. It only took, tens of thousands of hours of radio time to get you to lure you on, but thank you so much. And again, I know it's the palatial WPPM studios that finally brought you into the mix, and we want to again appreciate shout out to the executive producer and the manager here at WPPM Radio, Vanessa Maria Graber. You got to get Vanessa, Yvette. You got to connect with Vanessa.
She was dope.
She is dope, and she's got a lot to share and. Definitely want to keep you all collaborating. Stacking 20s, for those that don't know, is a weekly segment where we analyze the presidential campaign. Get it? 2020? Get it? The segment raises money, most importantly, for the Love Shouldn't Hurt campaign that supports domestic abuse survivors in Philadelphia with our great friend, Christina Vega, the founder of that very important initiative. I'm excited to share, Yvette, and to our family that the Love Shouldn't Hurt campaign's debuting their Break the Silence short film documentary on Sunday, April 28th at 3 p.m. at the Espita Education Center, 6301 North 2nd Street. For you old heads, that's the old Cardinal Doherty High School facility. So definitely check out the debut of the Break the Silence film, Sunday, April 28th, 3 p.m. at Espita at 6301 North 2nd Street. Support Love Shouldn't Hurt, and listen to the story of these three amazing women featured in this powerful video testimonial. Yvette, there's been a lot of discussion this week how gender and race are impacting the presidential coverage. Is the pretty Blanquito Beto getting more coverage than the women and the older and the people of color? Beyond presidential politics, of course, the right wing is obsessed with a young Puerto Rican woman from the Bronx, and in their case, not in a good way, in a very creepy way. She's debuted, of course, I'm referring to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's on the cover of next week's Time magazine. This woman is making money moves, no question. So, Yvette, my question to you is, as a woman in the career world, do you see parallels to some of the challenges of women sort of getting relative attention for maybe more work or similar work than their male counterparts?
First, I want to say that I think Beto's getting more attention because he's new and shiny. Like Kennedy, right, was attractive, and a lot of the women, sat in front of the television just to see him. I think that's what's happening with Beto. Like, we've seen Biden, we've seen Booker, we've seen Kamala in the last 2 years.
That's
we see
true.
AOC. I just think it's just because he's new and shiny. But as far as women and recognition, I've actually had to deal with that for the first time in my career. When I got mansplained for the first time, where I was on a conference call and I shared an idea, and then maybe 3 minutes later, a white man said the same idea. And when he shared the idea, everyone was all over it. And I was like, did that really just happen? And I texted my colleague, another woman, white woman, and, was like, isn't that what I just said 3 minutes ago? And she was laughing. And, it's annoying, but it's the first time it's ever happened to me. So I've been blessed in that way. And I shared earlier, it's just now that I'm in an environment that's not minority majority. I've, come from the nonprofit sector, and the chamber's a nonprofit as well. But I come from community-based organizations led by powerful people of color, men and women, who've created a very supportive environment. So I feel like I'm only now realizing how sheltered and protected and blessed I was. But I think that, this new environment also helps me grow and learn. And so I think that if you find yourself in that kind of situation, you have to customize the response to the scenario. So I don't have any direct guidance that's universal. But is it happening? Absolutely, it's happening. How do you deal with it? I've honestly just now had to deal with it. Did I confront them on the call? No, I didn't. I thought it was funny just because I was like, I've heard all about this on the news and it's never happened to me. But at the same time, I think it's really important to bring all of you into that room, right? I think I've been blessed to come across many women of color doing their thing, and the advice is always consistent. Bring all of you to the room. You can give yourself some time to get acclimated.
What is that, when you say that? What does that mean, bring all of you to the room? I mean, obviously people are attentive and they're working hard, but what does that mean?
Don't be deferential.
Got you.
To the people who've been in the room longer, to the people who are older, to the people who are, different gender. Bring your perspective and share your ideas, and don't wait for someone else to validate that it's a good idea. Assuming you've done your homework to get in the room and you've worked hard to get in the room, then just move. Because if you don't move, other people will move in your place.
Is part of that too, and maybe it's slightly different, is sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of like marketing what you're doing? Because oftentimes, and this is like kind of a cultural thing too, sometimes even beyond gender, like it's about just kind of do the work and you'll be acknowledged kind of thing sometimes, where I find that men is sometimes sort of are easy to, you see this in like memes about guys, relationships, like, you do the dishes once and guys want, all this credit and, like the touchdown dance. Do you see that as part of it, that there's a need to maybe be more proactive with marketing or sort of sharing what you're doing?
So I don't think that can be universal, because I think there are people who are naturally that way. And then I think there are people like, I'm not naturally that way. I find that completely obnoxious. And I've come across people who are forcing it, who are not naturally that way. And when they force it, it comes across as that much more obnoxious. I think it's better to, behind the scenes, connect with people who understand that environment that you're trying to progress in and get your footing in, for guidance, if it doesn't feel natural to you, right? For example, if you were to tell me, Yvette, I think you need to market yourself more and, be more aggressive, it just wouldn't be natural to me. So that's not good advice for me.
Gotcha.
For someone else who is that way and is aggressive maybe in every other field that they're in, and that would be a natural way, then tell them, don't slow up. Go ahead and, be aggressive and market yourself and let them know your skills and all of that. It will be authentic to them. And so it won't be off-putting. But if I did that, it would be off-putting to me.
Yvette Nunez dropping jewels. I wonder, Caesar, how full your book is, because you were the one I know that's writing this report. So, and we're talking to Yvette Nunez. Yvette, before you, I know you had a couple questions for me about this presidential stuff, but I had one for you. Without getting to maybe who you're supporting, because that's not really what I want to ask you, put you on the spot. But as from your perspective, as someone that's watching politics and paying attention, what do you want to hear these candidates talking about? Are there certain issues you're listening for? Is there a perspective you're listening for? What do you want to hear, and what do you want to get out of this debate that's happening to be the Democratic nominee, regardless who you want to support? But just what do you want to be hearing in this process? What do you hope comes out of this process?
I think that in my quiet, I have become so jaded about what anybody's saying. But I think that people should be responsive. I think when many people get positions of authority and influence, whether it's presidential, president over a nonprofit, local politics, etc., all of a sudden people feel like they own the responsibility of representing everyone and having all of the answers, and forget to go back and hear what the people are looking for and what the people need. And so I think they are elected to represent the people who elected them in the districts that they represent, but rarely go back to prioritize their platform and their agenda based on what the people need. Instead, we move into these positions and feel like we need to push or inadvertently push our own agenda because it's what we think is right. So I would like to see people be more responsive to what the American people are saying that they need, and that's economy, right? Jobs, healthcare. And I want to hear, I want to hear candidates talking about a better way to deal with immigration than building a wall.
I hear you. No, treat us all like human beings.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be something? So.
I don't feel like there are enough people countering some of the rhetoric that's coming out.
And besides that, I want to hear more about education. Because, we're talking about this immigration conversation, and one of the many angles to this is that we're not preparing, and we're not being proactive enough and bold enough to really prepare children, even on the K-12 level, much less college, to respond to the technological the job market that will await them. And so that's why we have to lean so heavily and and our tech industry wants to rely more heavily on legal immigration with certain tech fields. It's like, why aren't we training these children? It's so frustrating because a lot of that answer, unfortunately, is that because we don't have the political appetite to support minority youth, because I think it's something like every third of kid born right now in the United States is Latino. It might be more. Yeah. It'll be in the coming years it'll be half plus. We have that in a lot of our states, so a lot of that very much has a Latino civil rights lens to it. But I think Yvette, you had a question or two for me around the presidential stuff.
I do. What do you think of this rumor that former Vice President Joe Biden, who, by the way, I interviewed while he was a senator, I interviewed him for Univision at the non-existent now Pennsylvania Statewide Latino Coalition Conference.
Wow, that's old school, girl.
Yeah, I've been around for a minute.
I was actually at that. That's funny. We'll talk about that another time.
So anyway, what do you think about the rumor that he is going to announce that he's running with Stacey Abrams as his running mate?
This is really fascinating because on one hand, I'm one of these political nerds that hates that whole conversation around, I pick this one with that one, this one and that one. I don't like that conversation. First of all, it never really pans out. Second of all, it's corny. To me, it's like you got to focus on the president. You're trying to match him up with somebody. But, this is one case, Yvette. I think it's a fantastic idea.
But it matters. What if he dies?
Well, but, he's going to pick a reasonable person. Tim Kaine would have been okay. He brought nothing to the ticket. And it was a very, milquetoasty choice, which we all knew Miller was going to do. But my point is that this is a very specific case where I think it's awesome. Can I tell you? And I don't just say this because I like to keep everybody suspense on the show. I honestly don't have a candidate yet. I have my opinions, and I share with who's doing good. But I will say this. If Stacey Abrams declared, she'd be my candidate. Oh. I think she's the best Democrat in the United States. I think she's fantastic. I think she's a fantastic leader. I can't speak to what she would do from a foreign policy perspective because she doesn't have that background. Most Democrats, that's not their strong suit anyway. But I think in this case, I think it would be a great story, get everybody excited. And to me, it's kind of strategic because Biden not only kind of mitigates some of the racial stuff in the 70s and 80s and the moderate and the crime bill and all that, but also it gives you it delegates some of the work.
Yeah,
that's another person campaigning.
Yeah,
So, and I think I think it's a great idea. I really do. Uncle Joe, everybody, we love Uncle Joe. I grew up in Philly. He was like a senator here. Delaware's right down the block, so he's really like a local person here in many ways, and I think we all got a lot of love for him. But we all know his pros and cons. He's sort of never really steps it up in these settings when he actually runs for president. But I think for him, I think if they can pull the trigger on that, I think it's a good move.
And so besides that, what do you think was the biggest news in the presidential race this week?
I think the biggest news is what the news doesn't focus on, which is the policy. Mm-hmm. If people are really paying attention and you're really going to blogs and you're really studying these candidates, and people say, I don't know what these people are into. Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, Cory Booker, these candidates, and some of them have kind of been sort of second tier, perceived sort of under the radar right now. They're proposing some really interesting stuff. Elizabeth Warren's talking about breaking up big tech, which I know is controversial. A lot of people don't understand it, but I think it's very important. And we do have a history. When we were babies, Yvette, our parents would remember how they broke up the telephone company. And that was, that developed competition in the marketplace. Yeah, Bell
Atlantic.
Well, that's when you used to go like this.
And
I'm doing the I don't even know what you call that, the rotary phones. And then, she's talking about abolishing the Electoral College. Julian Castro has had some interesting comments about reparations. And also potentially having a Marshall Plan for Central America, sort of attacking this refugee crisis sort of from the source. And Cory Booker with this baby bonds thing and sort of some interesting concepts related to, sort of closing the wealth gap with the black community. So I think there's a lot of policy being talked about, but they don't pay attention to that in the mainstream media. That's why you got to listen and watch. In this case, our Facebook Live on Ray Latino Talk podcast. Political talk that's not a bunch of white dudes, as my friend Alicia Lewis coined. Yvette, when we come back, when we come back, we're going to talk about what Yvette Nunez, whatever she wants to talk about here on Ray's Latino Talk podcast.
You are listening to WPPM LP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, and you're listening to the What's Next radio show and Ray's Latino Talk podcast.
Thank you so much, Yvette Nunez, for helping me co-host the second half of the show. I want to shout out our friend AJ Beach, who shared with us information on an exciting event, art exhibit coming up here in Philadelphia. Yvette's a great patron of the arts. We're going to talk about that in a second. Chasing Freedom, Migrant Caravan Portraits. Artist Ada Trillo submerges herself into life along the border between Mexico and the United States to create portraits of the caravan of South and Central American refugees. The exhibit debuts here in Philadelphia on April 5th at 4 p.m. at the University of the Arts, Gresham Hall, main lobby, 401 South Broad Street. You've ever been in that space, Yvette? I'm sure you've been there.
Yes.
Several times.
I work across the street.
There you go, April 5th, and it runs through April 25th, so you have a few weeks there. Nice run there at the University of Arts, and support Ada Trillo and the Chasing Freedom exhibit at the University of the Arts. Yvette Nunez, we're going to wrap up this show because this last segment of the show, because we do want to talk about art, because Yvette, you're a great patron of the arts, and you're actually an artist yourself. So I know art has been very therapeutic and a big part of your ethos over the years.
So I'm a writer. Many, many years ago, as a little girl, I used to write stories. I went to Temple as a business law, intending to be a pre-law business law major. And I was taking a summer class on magazine article writing. And I had collected magazines all through high school and enjoyed that class so much that it was in that class that it dawned on me that I could be a writer for a living. I could use that skill for a living. And so that evolved into a degree in journalism and a career in PR, where a significant portion of my work was writing and communications. But over the last few years, that writing has gotten much more personal. And I've had the opportunity to perform a few spoken words, to write a lot of poetry when I'm going through things, whether it's the death of a loved one. Last year, my oldest brother passed away, and I wrote a piece dedicated to him and his life and his experience, again, because so many people who grow up in the projects, the way I grew up, their stories aren't told. And when they die, it's like they never existed because they're not leaving the career behind. They're not leaving the inheritance behind. And so a part of, my personal work is to make sure that I'm telling those stories, at least of the people I knew, whether it's my brothers and my family, people like Iri Labembua, my best friend Nani's mom, and incorporating all of those people into my stories, my poetry, and my book. I am working on a memoir.
Exclusive here on Ray's Talk Show.
Yes.
Very nice.
Exclusive to you and everyone on my Facebook page.
Well, it's our audience.
So I'm working on a memoir of my life on 7th Avenue, again, because there's a reason why I've carried all those stories with me all these years.
Right.
It dawned on me that it's a part of, the purpose God has given me is to tell these stories so that, people understand them in a different way, and people see poor people in a different way, and, as jokesters, charlatanes, and, people with assets and skills and talents, but at the most basic level, to just honor what God has taken me out of, and to honor the people who loved on me and made me who I am today.
Yeah, it's interesting because going back to this concept of kind of bringing people to our community and them opening their eyes. So every time I take people to drive up and down North Philly or visit a local high school or local space, they're amazed by our artistry, whether it's the graffiti, the murals. I mean, we have, of course, Betsy and all of our great friends that are muralists in Philadelphia, in this area.
Like, really so many. Maybe not all of your followers know, but we have so many fantastic Latino mural artists in Philadelphia. Betsy and Michelle, Cesar, and others. Like,
incredible.
The talent, just like walk around
and they
all
do
of
stuff
Philly.
all over the world. I mean,
all over the world.
But they're obviously
Ireland, South America, but
absolutely.
Such talent. Yep.
Yeah, no question. And I tell people, and whether it's dance, hip hop, singing, poetry, is that so many of our young people turn to it because it's not regulated. You don't need a worker's permit to do art. And so it's such a way of outlet of either expressing pain or just expressing yourself. Yeah. And you're so right, because I tell people, all of these stories, and thinking about our parents' generation, and even before that, our grandparents. I mean, these are movies, and we haven't. And Tanzina Vega, who you probably knows, who now does a daily show on NPR, and is sort of in a way pioneering our generation with in this genre. She talked about it, how maybe we're focusing too much on being at that table when we should be creating our own table, and oftentimes art sort of leads that conversation in our community.
Yeah. Great leadership in the art space and Latino community in Philly.
Yeah, no question. Yvette, what else is on your mind? I wanted to make sure we got in whatever your shout-outs were. I know you're very proud of your kids, and I know you're always working on a lot of stuff.
I think I would say what I take with me everywhere I go is, you mentioned earlier that you don't think the media is talking enough about policy. I don't think the hood is talking enough about policy. I don't think that people watching, the debates and watching the news and, Beto and Kamala, and I don't think they're focusing on policy enough. And I think we need to educate ourselves so that we aren't just led by people who may be pushing their own agenda and their own platform. And be careful, because even here, you've said many flattering things, but I don't pretend to represent the entire Latino community, the entire Puerto Rican community, everybody from the projects. We all carry our own story and apply our lenses to how we share that. And I think I'm more transparent than others in, where I'm coming from. But I think it's really important that you be mindful of not purporting to represent an entire community. And I think because our community, especially here in Philly, is the poorest community, and Philly being a city of neighborhoods, a lot of our communities and neighborhoods are so out of sight, out of mind. There are kids who've never been to Center City. And if Center City is where City Hall is and where decisions are made, what does that mean about...
And where the economy is.
Yeah, what does that mean about how they own their city? So when I talk to my kids, when I talk to kids from neighborhoods detached from Center City, it's, this is your city. I wasn't born and raised here. I'm from Newark. So I tell them, this is your city. You need to get to know what's happening in City Hall, walk those halls, tell them what you're looking for, get your mind out of just your block, right? When people say where they're from in Philly, it's what neighborhood they're from, right? And they may not have gone to other neighborhoods, and so they may not feel like this is all theirs. And I think how we talk to young people to feel ownership over their city and the electoral process and politics and how we begin to educate our community even about that electoral process. And, what does city council do? What does the mayor do versus what does Harrisburg do versus what does DC do, right? Sometimes people are frustrated with what's not happening and what they're not seeing, and they're directing that anger at the wrong office because they may not realize it. And I think every 4 years during election season, the community and voters get a lot of attention. You get a lot of door knocking. But then what happens the other 4 years? There's a lot of disengagement. And I wish that there were funds available and organizations dedicated just to educating neighborhood residents about the electoral process and building up their voice in those other 4 years.
No, you brought up many good points, and I would say a few things. One is that you're absolutely right. People, going back to sort of these local elections coming up in Philadelphia, and we have them all over the country, and Chicago, and many other cities, is that we have important local elections people need to focus on, mm-hmm. and not focus on kind of the headlines and the personalities. Really focus on what are the issues that these candidates are talking about that you relate to, and if they're not, how do you inject those issues into the conversation?
And even I'm guilty of it, right? We talk mm-hmm. about city council and mayor, but there's sheriff, there's judges, there's commissioners, right. And all of these people in all of these systems should be working in response and together to make a more effective government and make a more effective city. But a lot of them happen in isolation, and we don't even realize it because a lot of us don't even vote for all of those other offices.
That's right. And, I said it on the show last week. They had a meeting with Congressman Boyle, who basically now is the congressman for essentially what we think about as the sort of core Latino community east of Broad Street in Philadelphia. Yeah. And, he's got an office on Allegheny Avenue. He's got an office on Bustleton Avenue. You can go meet with his staff at any time. So we have outlets. And I would just say take a step. I always say that because people say, oh, people like you and Yvette, you guys know stuff. And maybe I'll just tell you, just tell me what to do. So no, I don't want to tell you how to think. I don't want to
tell anybody.
I want to open up a platform so we can bring on different voices for different perspectives. And then you all can start thinking more about how you feel about these issues, because we don't agree on everything, right. And that's okay. But I want you to be informed,
right?
I mean, you want to. Snap. There's people out here that I mean, some of the obvious people that are supporting people that literally, if they could deport you, if they could get rid of you, right. They would. Oh. Now, you still may want to be down with that, but you got to understand what you're talking about. And I'm not saying, and I've never if people, they may assume, but study my social media stuff, I don't worship Democrats. I don't. I understand that they're more aligned with us, but we have to hold them accountable like everybody else. And on this city level, let me tell you, we really can make a big difference if our folks get more involved. And don't be afraid. Take a step, because that's how it always started. You talked about your children. Young people mobilized every major thing in the world to change the world. And so and we've seen so many obvious examples of that you're never too young to be involved and make a difference. Yvette Nunez, you've been such a life force. It's always a great conversation with you. We finally just got to take one of these. Remind people they can follow you on social media. Keep the conversation going.
You can follow me on Twitter at Yvette A. Nunez, YvetteANunez.
Appreciate you. Keep the support Ray's Talk Show. Support WPPM Philadelphia. And have a wonderful week.
Take care.